intelligent, that you understand how people are responding to you, you're sensitive to that, you have the ability to generate and resonate positive emotions in people. Have you?
Empathy, yes.
Empathy, yeah, which our spiritual chapter looked at, the whole question of, is it possible for there to be resonance between minds? I don't know if you caught that part, but it's an interesting question. And there are field theories in communication studies. This is not rhetoric anymore right now. But there are field theories that argue that when people get together, there are nonverbal communications that are not even signaled, like, you know, how you sit and all that stuff. But there are ways in which there's a communication that happens.
Just like if you're close with someone, like I'm sure everyone, if you're someone like that you're close with, and like my sister and my best friend, like without even talking, most of the time I just know what they're thinking because you just like learn to anticipate it, like how they.
Yes, but that's background. So more.
You know, well, that's this angel-to-angel communication that the spiritual book was talking about, you know, and the idea of creating thoughts in another through resonance, you know, but there are, nonetheless, there are theories, especially around emotional intelligence, that argue that a group of people will get together and they will create an emotional unit. And there have been research about trying to figure this out, whether it's smell, you know, whether it's subliminal smell, or what is it? What's that?
Pheromones.
Pheromones, or whatever it is. There have been experiments done where they will put 3 people in a room, all wired up, you know, with, you know, photoelectric things to determine, and they'll tell them, okay, you're gonna wait in here till we go do the experiment or something, you know. And then one of the people is a part of the experiment, and they are practicing themselves into a very anxious state about something. And the other people who are not talking to that person or anything, they can measure the rise in anxiety in the other people who are in the area. So how does that work? You know, I don't know. But they're studying field theories. They talk about this with mob psychology and crowds too. You know, what's that about? How does that work? So there's some interesting things going on with that. So how do we get into that? What was our initiating
the vibrations between
launch? Oh yeah, that you have to have emotional as well as the intellectual. Okay. All right. So any thoughts or questions so far? So Aristotle, what was your impression of reading Aristotle, you know, as Aristotle? Tough?
I had read the Republicans for English.
Okay.
By him, so I already had an idea of his writing style and stuff like that, but it doesn't mean I'm used to it.
Well, of course.
It's rough. It's a hard read, but you can, once you get into the essence of it, it's not that you can't understand what he's trying to say, it's just, you're like, okay, you could have taken that out. It's very wordy.
Right, yeah. Prolix, yes. There's a lot of wordiness. And of course, this is not as if he wrote it as a treatise. It's a assembled thing. I find that you had to get in a certain frame of mind, which I think is very similar to the frame of mind you need to read Little John. Because Little John, to me, is very much like this. He'll just, you know, goes through all these things. Then he shifts and goes through all another thing. I had to shift my mind.
It's funny, I mean, just on a superficially, I kept thinking, do you ever read Kurt Vonnegut? The way, if you look at his books, he always leaves like a space between ideas and sections. And as I was reading the rhetoric, I was just longing for a physical space between the words. I just thought, God, I need to breathe. Like, and I was thinking, like, even if it was just physically laid out with just a little space between the thoughts, that it would be easier to digest or to, you know. At least
well, Kennedy might do that for you, so he may set it up that way. Of course, we don't know what this looked like in the Greek.
Yeah.
lot of Greek manuscripts did not leave spaces between words sometimes, because you just knew where the words ended. So it's, some Greek manuscripts are continuous letters. Yeah. So that's what makes for textual criticism at times about, well, should this letter go with this word or with that word, you know, and what did it mean? Yeah. Anyway, Loeb has, you know, the Loeb Classical Library has a version of it in Greek, if you're really into it. You want to read rhetoric in Greek. Probably not. All right, let's do Gorgias, then we'll break. And then we'll hit some of the more current-y ones. Gorgias, of course, comes before the Republic. So we're kind of out of order here. So the key people that at least we need to be aware of are Socrates, who is Plato's voice in this dialogue. Gorgias, who is the personification of all that's wrong with the rhetors, the sophists, rather. And Polus, who is a young student of Gorgias. And Polus, apparently the word means a young pony or something, you know. So he's kind of the kicking around upstart who tries to show off a little bit. So so you get into the dialogue, and I enjoy these. Did this go better for you? Yeah. No. Get to the point.
Well, it's a lot of this. No, that. Yes, that.
A lot of there are witticisms of sort, you know. Well, I can answer quite well if thank you, you know. It says.
It's like, you know, when you watch old movies, I don't know if anyone else has it, but it just seems like, and not that our stuff is so much better, but it just seems so fake. Like the, you know, like when you listen to it, and it's like, oh wow, Santa's real, you know, like very like forced, you know.
Yeah, no, I think they actually talked, you know, more like that. Well, it's all for all we know, you know. So we've got these dialogues, the written dialogues, and so Socrates goes after Gorgias and asks him, "What are you?" You know, and finally he gets that he's a rhetorician, and so I'm a rhetorician. I teach men to speak, and I make them wise. And so he goes after it, and he wants to finally get him to admit that he doesn't make people good. So that's part of his goal here, is to say that you don't make people good. Now, again, on page 111, he comes to the point where Gorgias says, for persuasion is the chief end of rhetoric. And so again, you get into this issue of moral rhetoric and community issues. And so Plato is painting him into a corner. No, it's just about persuasion and teaching people to make these arguments. Now, he finally pushes him into this argument about physicians and cookery and making people good. So that's where I want to get to work with that for a while. So on page 113, he comes to the point at the top, first column, Socrates, and the rhetorician does not instruct the courts of law or other assemblies about things just and unjust, but he creates belief about them. So the goal of a rhetorician in Plato's Gorgias is to make people believe something is just, not to train them in what is really just or true. And so this gets into the whole, I think someone in their reflection talked about this, their acquaintances with lawyers, you know, and asked, well, maybe it was another group, and what do you do? You know, and the answer was, well, I make the best argument I can for my client. You know, and so to some extent that tradition is valid still, that the lawyer's goal is to make the best argument they can make on behalf of the client, and not so much to talk about what is just or unjust, but to create the belief of it. Yeah. Down in the middle of page, second column, page 113, he talks about being careful. So Gorgias says, about halfway down that quote there, "Yet, Socrates, rhetoric should be used like any other competitive art, not against everybody. The rhetorician ought not to use his strength any more than a pugilist or a pancratiast or other masters of fence. Because he has powers which are more than a match for either friend or enemy, he ought not therefore to strike, stab, or slay his friends." So there's again the ethical use of the power that comes from being a good speaker. All right.
I feel like it's a little hypocritical. Like,
What's that?
You say like just to look at like the logic and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but yet I feel like when you read it, it's trying to be like these are bad people. You know what I mean? Like I think it's trying to sway you with emotion.
Oh,
like,
here.
You know what I mean? Like he's like,
yeah.
oh, just look at logic, just look at logic. But when it's someone I don't like,
To make them, yeah. Well, I don't know. Plato was more of the strict logician. Socrates, but of course, it's Plato writing it. So yeah.
But yeah, so it's like someone that because he doesn't like him,
Right.
Then all of a sudden, like it's a different.
It's okay if I warp the judgment of people. Yeah. So down on 117, you come to the turn where now Socrates is going to say what he thinks rhetoric is. Okay. So in the middle of column 1 on page 117, Polus, now I will ask, and you answer me, Socrates, the same question which Gorgias, as you suppose, is unable to answer. What is rhetoric? Socrates, do you mean what sort of an art? Yes. To say the truth, Polus, it is not an art at all. Then what, in your opinion, is rhetoric? Thing which, as I was lately reading in a book of yours, you say that you have made an art. What thing? I should say a sort of experience. Does rhetoric seem to you to be an experience? That is my view, but you may be of another mind. An experience in what? Now here is where you got to it. An experience in producing a sort of delight and gratification. So there you got it. You know, Socrates is saying, this is no art. This is just making things look good that aren't good and making people feel good when they're not healthy. So it's a knack, not an art. So, and if able to gratify others, must not rhetoric be a fine thing? What are you saying, Polus? Why do you ask me whether rhetoric is a fine thing or not, when I've not told you as yet what rhetoric is? Did I not hear you say that rhetoric is sort of experience? And Socrates, will you, who are so desirous to gratify others, afford a slight gratification to me? I will. So he says, will you ask me what sort of an art is cookery? Or, you know, this is chef, a chef. You know, what does a chef do? What sort of an art is chefing, you know, and cooking? It's not an art at all, Polus. He says, what then? I should say an experience. An experience in producing a sort of delight and gratification. So he says the chef's job is to make something that tastes good. It may not be good for you, may not heal your disease, may give you high cholesterol and make it, but it tastes good. And that's their job. So he says that is, then Polus says, then cookery and rhetoric are the same? No, Socrates, but they are only parts of the same profession, and the same profession is this. Down at the bottom, my opinion then, Gorgias, the whole of which rhetoric is a part, is not an art at all, but a habit of a bold and ready wit, which knows how to manage mankind. This habit I sum up under the word flattery. And it appears to me to have many other parts, one of which is cookery, which may seem an art, but is only an experience or routine. Another part is rhetoric, the art of attiring and sophistry, clothing people. So fashion is another form of this, where you can take a sick person and dress them up so they look good, or you can do cosmetics. He'll say later on about cosmetics. He says you can take a person who's unhealthy and make them look better, and this is what rhetoric is like. You dress them up, you put cosmetics on them, you feed them fine food, but they're not healthy, and you're not helping them get any better.
So where's the ethics in that?
Well, this is what Socrates ends up saying, that it's an ignoble art, it's an ignoble habit. And if I'm compelled to answer what I call bad ignoble, and it's a counterfeit of politics. And so something may be good in appearance, but not good in health. And then he gets into his last whole thing there, that a trainer, a physical therapist, a trainer, is not interested in making you look good. They're interested in producing health for you. But a fashion person can dress up and not care about your health and make you look healthy, or make you look taller or shorter or thinner or slimmer or whatever you want to do. And so he says this is what rhetoric is like. So that's the main thing I wanted to pull out of this. Any thoughts or questions about that? So it's like it's like being a chef. It's like being a fashion person. It's like being a makeup artist.
I was thinking about acting because that's because I guess I've done it for a long time, and I thought about my mind went to like actors in the 1930s, making films. Let's say 1932, 33, 34, when the Depression was at its worst. And so they took people out of that for a nickel, and took them someplace else for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And to me, that is an art that has value and keeps you going, but it's still what I mean. It doesn't make you a better person necessarily. It doesn't. Well,
let me challenge your history a little bit. Where would Aristotle put theater?
Well, I guess it was a big thing in Greece, but I don't know.
Right. It's in the Poetics. It's in Aristotle's Poetics.
Oh, okay.
It's where he talks about what is it? Catharsis and tragedy and comedy? Is that the two things? Yeah, so I don't mean to change that on you, but yeah. But he had a place for that, and he was not.
Then.
What's that?
I said okay then.
No, that's fine. Just a little. I can't believe I remembered that. I haven't thought about that in 20 years. But yeah, in the Poetics. Who's read the Poetics? Or tell us about the Poetics.
He talks about the idea of beauty, and that beauty is. He puts a persona of a man in with. What is the idea of a man? A man is not supposed to be someone who can feel and have the passion and have the beauty that belongs to a woman. He talks about that. And he says that poetry then, in some ways, he denies poetry. He doesn't like poetry because it has the feelings of poetry. He says it's for women. And because men shouldn't have to be like that. They should deal with emotions. He goes on for about 40 pages of that thing.
So
emotions in men. And the beauty is another guy. Is only something that the women can do that because it deals with emotions and stuff.
Okay, you had a feminist teacher of the Poetics.
I was actually taught by 2 teachers. I had a male and a female.
Okay. Anyway, so Aristotle, you have dialectics, which is logic, and then you have the rhetoric, which is a form of politics for decisions, and then you have the Poetics, which has to do with the catharsis arts and the beauty and the sublime, I suppose, and things like that.
I don't know. I guess it's just me, but I was reading it, I was getting so annoyed because I just felt like so much of it was really hypocritical. Like when they talk about truth and stuff, like, and I guess maybe it's just like a different take, but some things there are, like you were saying, like absolute truth, and other things, even if there is absolute truth, like, you know, like how big is this room? If I believe it's like 2 feet by 2 feet, like if I truly believe it, like what you believe becomes true to you, like you react to it as if it's truth. So, and like I guess it makes me think of people with like phobias and stuff. You know, like if they're afraid of that clown's really scary. You know, like whether we think it's scary or not. So when these people are talking, he goes, you know, it's not making you better, it's not doing this, it's not doing that. If, you know, and I guess sometimes like people talk about this in religion and stuff, if you believe something, whether it's true or not, but you really believe it and someone convinces you of that, and it makes you feel better, then it does help you, and it does make it better, whether you dress it up or not. Like, and I just kind of feel like when he's like, oh, this is, you know, this is truth, and some of, you know, that's not truth what you say. Right. And I don't really know. I wasn't there like how many years ago, but I just like it just kind of got on my nerves because I felt it was like really like.
Yeah. Well, of course they believe in transcendent truth. They believe in truth that would be true even if there were no human beings in existence. There are still things that would be true.
But like, and like there are
truth is not dependent on humans.
On that, but they don't like what they think. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I guess it was just really.
Yeah, I'd have to think about that more, but Plato's argument with Gorgias is that you don't care about what's just and true. So even if you know your client is guilty, you're going to teach him to make an argument that he's not guilty. So in a more pragmatic way, that's what they're talking about. I just want to point out here that this reflects a little bit of Habermas's argument about life worlds. So part of Habermas in the theory of communicative action is that the life world has been colonized by technical rationality. So this is just a little aside. Habermas has the theory of communicative action. So he's a communication theorist about how communication shapes society. And his argument is that life world, you can think of it as made up of 3 parts. And you have your instrumental rationality, which is how to fix a chair, how to launch a spaceship, how to create, you know, a computer. That's instrumental rationality. And then you have your pragmatic life world where we, you know, get up in the morning and we eat cereal and we wash our dishes and we have friends and relationships and where we live. And then he says there's also your aesthetic dimension, which is the creation of transcendence, of art, of beauty, of paintings, of poetry, of music, where we create these things. And Habermas's argument is that instrumental rationality has colonized these things in our modern world, so that we begin to run our lives on management theories. You know, that we begin to scientifically structure our daily living. So, and that our art gives way to art that is created by digital art, right? Would be a form where Habermas was afraid as he saw instrumental rationality and scientific reason taking over the whole experience of human existence. And so he wants to push back. He wants to say, no, there's a pragmatic dimension of life which is not all about logic and numbers and counting and measuring and timing people, how long it takes you to get from here to there. You know, there's a place where we live in emotions and human life. And there's a place where we launch rockets and build, you know, computers. And then there's a place, and we have to protect each of those spheres from the intrusion of the other. So he would not be happy either if the aesthetic took over the pragmatic life world too.
He was like a pre-Cervantes guy?
In a sense, he wants to preserve space, right? He would see in France this invasion of the life world by instrumental rationality, technical rationality. And even Aristotle recognized the different spheres, but carved out space for each of them. And of course, you had the whole religious mythos sphere that came after Aristotle reemerged again too. So, but it's just a connection here between Aristotle and Habermas in thinking about how communication functions. So this is why some people get, this is the difference in comm theory between those who prefer a scientific versus a humanistic approach to the study of communication. Because there was a time, there are people who wanted to study communication in labs, in white coats, with, clipboards. And that's how we studied how groups function, right? We put a bunch of people together, we say, here's a task, solve it. We study what they do. But later group theory came along and said, that's a bizarre group. No one functions in a group like that. We need bona fide group. We need real existing groups to study, not in a lab with white coats surrounded by lights and cameras. So it becomes part of the struggle between the realms of intelligence. All right, let's break for a bit, and then we'll come back and do Burke. I think we'll start with Burke, and then hit Foss, and then if we have time, we'll talk about how angels communicate with each other. See if we have enough time. So we'll try 10 minutes. Okay.
Got my text message. I was stuck in traffic.
Oh, no, I didn't. All right.
So I apologize.
That's okay.